Good afternoon, everybody. And I guess this is just the last hour of the day, and I'm sure everybody's looking up to packing up and leaving. But I'd like to say I really am gratified and fulfilled. I had to take some time out of my office, and it reminded me of the fact that I could be facing censure for not having been present. Almost like the school suspending a pupil who plays truancy. So maybe suspended for being truant, which is unfortunate because I'll continue with my truancy in that respect. I certainly would like to say quite a lot of things have been covered. And I think you probably have got constipation by now to want to imagine the information overload that you have had. And I'm also conscious of the fact that I should not destroy the palatable meal that you had in terms of the knowledge, information, and everything by spoiling the whole fun with coming with something that will make you wonder, who is this person? He's acting contrary to what we've been receiving here. It's almost like, if I remember very well, one day I went to a bookshop here, and there was a guy there who really appeared very intellectual, and he was hanging around there reading books, etc. And then he went to the counter and said, excuse me, ma'am, can I have a book on Shakespeare? So yeah, sure, he'll get Shakespeare. And then which Shakespeare would like to have? He said, William. So sometimes you get caught up in these things when you try to move in. So I'm trying to be very careful in my presentation. But I think there is one particular aspect. I know operators have come here to speak about the operational possibility, how can they can serve society, etc. I'm sure even a policymaker came around. Maybe you have not heard the voice of the regulator in what this means to the regulator, because the regulator's primary constituency is certainly the consumer. There's no doubt about it. And then you can ask yourself, when you do talk about PPP, shouldn't it be 4 Ps? Private, public, people, partnership. The people aspect is very key. Because you don't want to second guess what you think the consumer wants. There must be a feasibility study, and you must understand what their needs are. And businesses today are operating not on what I can call pushing down the throat their products on us. They must assess what our needs are and customize the needs according to what the customer will really gain benefit out of. Let me not waste too much of your time, but I would like to, is this how it works? Okay. I just want to really delve onto what I think to me is a pet project. My topic is the new decade. There's no doubt that we are already in the new decade with regard to futuristic technologies, and we certainly are focusing on new generation networks. There's no doubt about that. Anyone who does not go along that route may find himself obsolete and being laid next to the Bronze X. So largely, we have to find out how if you were to ask 10 years ago where we were in terms of ICT and where we are currently, they will realize that it's almost a quantum jump in a way. The possibilities that are there for the future, only imagination can determine what that is. Sometimes we have to be fearful as to what really portends for the future. This is just an outline of what I really would like to cover. To the extent that we have new generation network, the regulator's understanding, and there are certain ramifications out of the new generation networks that have not been spoken of, but which certainly are supposed to be dealt by the regulator in ensuring that the public or the consumer's needs are met. Definition, of course, obviously, we've got many varied definitions. Mine will be just a summary definition of what my understanding is. And, of course, I will also look at some of the issues relating to convergence. What's the relationship between convergence and the new generation network? I believe people must make a distinction in that particular regard and understand the relationship between new generation networks and convergence. They are certainly considered in a manner in which one could say they are twins, or one is the elder brother. Certainly NGN is the elder brother to convergence, because without new generation network, you can't have convergence. But I would like to look at also the implications relating to what we are normally used in the telecommunication environment with regard to local loop unbundling, interconnection, and many other aspects, bundling of services, etc. What does this mean? Well, our market's going to be the same when we get into the new generation network. And of course, there are also legal ramifications, policy, legal, and regulatory ramifications with regard to that. The essence really is that whereas before we have separate structures of fixed, mobile, and data services, we now have one horizontal structure with its intelligence. In this respect, the intelligence is inside each and every. So you got a telecoms expert, mobile expert, data network expert, etc. You can imagine the plethora of technicians and all kinds of things that have got to man many of these things. Now, this is very simplified now. One single network with horizontal layers that relate to customer premises, the aggregation plane, the transport plane, control plane. These have already been alluded to by many, but I'm just more or less put it in there to understand that from the vertical of separate networks, you are now going to a horizontal network with layers. From the customer premise equipment, and you proceed right up, the aggregation is where all the data converges in or diverges to the access plane. And the intelligence with regards to the new generation network is obviously outside the network, as opposed to the historical fixed, mobile, and data. The intelligence is inside. Now, what are the key physical components of new generation network? Clearly, fiber, and certainly we are going the optical route. The electrical route has got its own limitation, but the optical route, especially when the essence is broadband services. The broadest bandwidth that you can ever get for now is fiber. And therefore, we have to leverage that and make sure that we have to provide all the kinds of services that are imaginable under the sun. And the need for broadband is, without a doubt, the key to accessing all of the services that we are thinking of. All clearly, you can see there, you are forgetting the PSTN kind of paradigm. You are moving into very new innovative routers and call servers, gateways. Edge devices will be metro nodes. Multimedia service access network would be what you would call the main distribution frame where the DSLAM is, etc. And you may now have to go back to the fiber cap and forget the local exchange. And what does that mean for local loop and bundling? I'll come back to that at another stage. But it is a multimedia tool, no doubt about it, which has got these capabilities, broadband capabilities, especially when the core network is fiber, which in a way it is anticipated to be, or as the rollout is going on, I'm sure Neotel can tell you what they are rolling out across there in terms of the core network. And I think that will create an understanding. We really also look at to what extent are there latencies in there. This whole thing will be IP-based, etc. And then, of course, we have to make sure that the packet loss should be, and the moves are made technologically to ensure that the target is less than 1%. Because here you are dealing now with routing and data and all kinds of things. There would necessarily have to be guarantees for quality of service. So that's really where the regulators got to make sure that the customer is delighted, not only satisfied, but delighted by the service. Now, the scope, of course, of the NGN is that it will provide any and all applications. These are just examples, voice, video, data, the multimedia, etc. But we don't know what really other services are going to be. And that in itself, we know that all of these things will be transmitted over the IP network. And then, of course, with point-to-point and point-to-multipoint accessibility. There is the scope, apart from the definition, and infrastructure, and a single system that needs to be administered in terms of operation and management and maintenance, etc. What does that mean? It makes your engineer not to worry about different systems, but to concentrate on that single system to be able then to have a better economies of scope. Unlike dealing, you've got to have an expert on fixed or the technician on fixed, the technician on mobile, etc. You now have a single system with all those different planes, and therefore the engineer can clearly, fully focus on really having all the kind of issues pertaining to one particular system, as opposed to different. What does that do in terms of human resources? It clearly reduces the cost in that particular respect. And of course, this is where I was trying to point out. You have a system that integrates voice, video, data, multimedia, etc. You most certainly need a converged transport mechanism. And what is that? Without a doubt, NGN. The relationship between convergence and NGN. This is mine. You converge, you integrate all the services to one transport mechanism. If NGN were not there, all those services could not be converged. But because we now have NGN, we will converge all of the services. Of course, it could be through access. You can choose what services you want. But in terms of the core, the NGN will converge all of those services. Then you can choose in terms of access, whether you want voice, video, data, etc., and all that. This is the beauty of NGN. And I think we all must accept it. And if there are any greenfield operators, they better launch into NGN and forget about the PSTN, which really has got its limitation in terms of all the kinds of things that you are thinking in terms of broadband services. You know, ADSL has got its own limitation in terms of distance because there are attenuation and also a lot of interferences there, especially when lines are more or less parallel to each other. And when you are far from the local exchange, there are limitations. You won't get the maximum bandwidth that you can think of. So there comes the fiber to the cap, fiber to the house, fiber to the premise. Of course, in that particular respect, the cost of NGN could be minimized close to 70% because the switching and transmission is common. You'll have a call server where everything is routed. That in itself will reduce the cost, certainly, no doubt about that. So there are the advantages. Now, with regard to convergence, is there going to be distinction between fixed and mobile? It has already been alluded to in terms of the IP multimedia services, that you will have one particular number and you will use one device and get everything that you want. So that's really what it is. Telecom, internet, is there any need to make a distinction between telecom and internet? Because the internet is taking over everything, since everything will be IP-based, etc. What is the distinction between services and applications? Is it not the same thing? I need to be advised. But I believe there is no distinction between the two, if there is any differences between them. Now, what does it mean, convergence in terms of transport? Clearly, the transport will be IP-based network, right? So what it means, the convergence of the transport network in order to get the integrated services. That's what convergence will mean in terms of transport. In terms of systems, what do you mean that? A system that will allow voice, video, data, multimedia, all to be commonly served by one device. Suffice to say that. I think that is an advantage, rather than to be carrying all these many things in your pocket, etc. You know, you just have this thing and it will serve you in terms of access the internet, make your voice and all that. You've got now DVB-H, which now is also tapping into broadcasting. So what more else do you need? Size and cost will tremendously be reduced. So the call servers are clearly the soft switches that we are alluding to, and therefore that's why the costs of transmitting and switching will be reduced. In terms of application, I don't know. We want to promote an information-based society, a knowledge-based society. How are we going to provide all the e-services, e-health, e-entertainment, e-commerce, e-government, and sometimes these days we believe that no longer be human beings who will be going into combat. It will be remote warfare. And this is what you should be watching. Probably that's how Saddam Hussein was caught up in that thing, because there was some kind of a satellite that zeroed in on him and said, oh, there he is, etc. Now we got him, don't worry about him, we'll catch up with him. It's a pity that they had to destroy the whole of Iraq before they could catch up with one person. And they had the technology to catch up with one person. There's so much for what is happening in Iraq over just the question of hunting for one individual. Humanity have to suffer. Today we are having oil prices rising the whole world. So the cost and effect relationship of all this, we are faced with serious costs, and there's the cost of food shortages worldwide, etc. And you can find what is the relationship with between food shortage, transportation, and oil. Maybe there is a relationship. So those are the kinds of things that could be put to misuse. Now, clearly, these days, even though we know the human ear is analog, but the transport means and mechanism is that everything will be transduced into data. In other words, bits, ones and zeros, or bytes. You know, a 8-bit word is a byte. So we are really consuming bytes. So the cost at the later stage would be, can you give me 1 gigabyte at 200? Then I can do anything that I want with my gigabyte. I can get into the internet, do video on demand, and email, etc. and all. What have you bought? You've got bytes. So the cost will no longer, especially when services are packaged. I give you so many, 3 gigabytes, you can do anything you want. And if you want some more, if you want voice, you want broadcasting, whatever thing, etc. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know. Maybe people will say, no, we still want the minutes. The cost per minutes may just probably be no longer the issue. And I have a belief that in the final analysis, as we know that most of the services in the future will be no longer voice cost. Anybody who's depending on increasing ARPU on voice, he lives in a dream world. You have to provide other services so that you can increase your ARPU, not to increase the cost of voice by way of increasing ARPU. Because prices and costs must come down. And because we have competition, that certainly will be the question of, can I survive on voice alone? No, I cannot survive. Maybe I need to bundle my services and say, over voice, maybe voice will be free. If you have Skype, etc., shouldn't you throw in voice for free? Because you can access voice over IP, Skype, etc., and all that. So voice has become a commodity. That's really, whether people like it or not, it certainly is going to become. Anybody who hopes to have a business model based solely on voice probably will have to rethink before he starts spending money. Clearly, we talked about IMS, IP multimedia system, where there is no more distinction between fixed and mobile, and this is facilitated by the IP multimedia system as it is, because the distinction is eliminated in that particular respect, especially because you have one device with one number. You can be mobile, you can be in the office, you can be somewhere, etc. Now add to that DVB, H. You got it all. So we are now, the lifestyle of human beings or for modern society is really going to change because of this. You know, you have to have your currently what you have, you've got your phone number at home, you've got your cell phone, and you've got many other gadgets here and there. You'll just have this that will provide you all of these services. So I think that should be classed with enthusiasm. There's no doubt about that. And I pointed out about multi-media service access network. Those are just, if you were to look at what this would mean in analog terms, would be the main distribution frame, where you have the call cards. Now this multimedia service access network, which is part and parcel of the components of the NGN, which sits at the edge of the NGN, between the customer or in the access plane, let me put it that way. That in itself is certainly a new change, because if you want to do local loop unbundling that I will talk about, where are you going to unbundle the local loop? It's no longer at the local exchange. It's outside. It's at the cap. So you must go there to the cap. Fiber to the cap, fiber to the home, fiber to the premises. What are the implications of that? So that's really what I'm really trying to point out. Now, what are the question of interconnection? Those are the things that probably I would like to bring forth to the table. Any interconnection between systems, if one is IP-based and one is time division multiplexing based, there will be a transition that will add 40 minutes of delay. Now, if you have multiple interconnections, then of course the delay may certainly be unacceptable. Now you go to GSM. GSM adds on an extra 80 milliseconds. The argument is to have for all NGNs to be interconnected via IP interfaces. There's no doubt. That's really what it should be. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's clearly a matter for us to clearly understand that we are not saying that if you have a PSTN phone or whatever mobile, you must forget about it and move it. Those things will still be supported because of this multi-service access node. There's no doubt about that. So don't as yet junk your stuff, etc., and believe like you say we are in a different environment. Your services will still be provided for in the access mode via the MSEN. The MSEN will connect you to the core network, which is really what we are talking about as the new generation network. And there is also the new generation access network as opposed to the new generation core network. And that distinction must be clearly spelled out. Because I think to a very extent we are very presumptuous as what we really mean by new generation. So as I said, the MSAN will be clearly doing all the kinds of things that we are having today in terms of multiplexing, coding, etc., analog to digital, etc., and all kinds of things. So things that are normally provided for by the DSLAM for the broadband will be provided by the MSAN. Of course, what does it mean? If you are able to have your MSAN and you are able to provide broadband services, what would anybody want to do with local loop unbundling? Because while you are providing telephony services, you are at the same time providing broadband services via the MSAN. And the disadvantage for local loop unbundling is that this whole thing resides at the cap. You would have the whole core fiber, you take it to the cap, it can be fiber to the cap. So if you want to local loop unbundling, it's no longer at the exchange, local exchange, it is at the cap. Because that will now connect to the wire, the two pair copper wires. You'll have all the fiber going to the cap. So those are the ramifications. And we know that the signaling system here, protocol, will be session initiation protocol. That's really what it's going to be. And of course, the point of interconnects are likely to be at the metro node. Yeah, what does that mean? With regard to the alternative network operators, their investments may be lost because they will still be battling wars that have already been lost at the local exchange, while you will have moved into the cap because you'll have your fiber there. What does that mean in terms of also the implications for those who have invested? Are they going to use long-run incremental costs, and which really clearly in simple terms that the additional cost as a result of additional services? So that's really what you have to look at in terms of how, if you are having your NGN and people want to connect, what kind of charges are you going to bring about in terms of interconnection? Clearly, we want to make sure that we encourage investment, and we will therefore try to make sure that you do get a good enough return for your investment in that particular area. The legal ramification of this is that to the extent that we have telephony services that have from time to time provided some of the things that I have pointed out here, we have to make sure that these are fulfilled with a new generation network. Clearly public safety, yes. Public safety and law enforcement and fraud prevention need to be taken care of, and the new generation network must ensure that this is handled emergency services and all kinds of things. You know, if you have VoIP, suddenly you get an attack, but you can't reach an emergency organization or an emergency center because for some reason there were other things. So the obligations of this nature are in the public interest. And the regulator has got to make sure that all the services provided can make it clear and possible that these are non-negotiable. And clearly, we will talk about privacy and all kinds of things, but those are the things that need to be taken in. I wanted to make a distinction between new generation networks and new generation access networks. I think that is very, very clear. It's really to reach the last mile, if one were to define it that way. And we will use the local infrastructure that is available. You can use your mobile, you can use your PSTN, you can use your satellite, you can use your cable, etc., and all that. So those access networks will still be there. Of course, there will be the aggregation at the core. Clearly, the technologies for delivering new generation access networks are all the kinds of things, because now we are moving into broadband services. And those are the capabilities of the kind of technologies, the DSL technologies, etc., the optic fiber, passive, and this is the broadband passive optic network, which has got those capabilities in downlink and uplink, the Ethernet passive optic network, and the gigabit. So that's really what we are going to have to be delighted about in this particular respect. Now, other technologies that are pointed out, you still have your WiMAX, satellite, and mobile infrastructure. Actually, when I wanted to speak, if I had an opportunity, I wanted to go further into 4G, because that is the one that probably will provide the necessary access, and WiMAX. The two probably are one and the same thing. Maybe WiMAX is just another name for 4G. I'm not too sure, but I want to believe that 4G in its standardization will not have much difference with standards, etc., from WiMAX. Maybe 80% of 4G will be WiMAX. Local loop unbundling, when you have a new generation access network, is that now the network, the unbundling will have to happen at the fiber to the cap. Right? Now, if it were to go to the home, to the premises, would there still be need for unbundling? I'm taking this fiber into someone else's house. Would you want to go and unbundle at his house? That's probably what I'm trying to point, that local loop unbundling becomes virtually impossible if you have fiber to the home or fiber to the premise. And then, of course, what about the investments that have been located there in terms of local loop, the DSLAMs and all many other things that are there, the splitter units and all that. So to that extent, we have now to look at the ramifications of what we have been told, that we must unbundle the local loop. And Angus will tell you that they're using CDMA to reach the last mile. They may want to reach, get local loop unbundling, but with fiber being rolled, they'll have to unbundle at the cap. Clearly, the policy, law, and regulatory, which is really the pet issue that I wanted to bring forth here, is that, as you know, there are conflicting interests in this. The operators want to make profit. The consumers want to have the best price product at the lowest price. The policymaker want to make sure that he's voted into power the next time around, so we have to implement. And, of course, we also have a role to play there, since we are at the hub of all this. So how do you optimize the needs of all of the people? It should be that PPPP that I'm talking of, 4 Ps, that should help optimize. Give and take. Somewhere along the way, if you maximize, you may end up losing the societies that are due to, the values that are due to society. What would the regulator do in the face of dealing with this related? Is really to assume a technology neutral and service neutral approach, in that we should not care what technologies deliver any services. We should just be flexible, that if these services can be delivered, so be it, without making any prescription. Of course, clearly, we as regulators must have an understanding of the emerging technologies in order to be able to bring regulation in line with the technologies that are on, rather than to frustrate these technologies by coming up with human-made prescriptions. Because these are the laws of nature, the laws of physics that have been customized into product, why would we really negate that? VoIP for some time was ruled out as illegal, but we realized that we are fighting a war that has long been lost. And of course, needless to say that we as regulators want to ensure that there is quality of services. And then, of course, we'll have a charter that ensures that there is quality of service. There could be prioritization, but there will be best effort. The COC's class of services, which there could be priorities of class, and then maybe there will be price discrimination in that particular respect. This is really what I'm trying to say, that we certainly would... okay, that's really what it is. The cost, as I've already indicated, should be cheaper, and it should be cheaper to roll out. You know what that would mean in terms of the lowering of costs. Maintenance and operational costs will reduce, and the customer will have a choice of plethora of services. And because there would be that assumed competition, it is where the regulator steps back and says, let the market decide in terms of choice of consumers, etc. As long as you have competition, liberalization, and all that, you really have a far much more easier role to play as a regulator. Of course, clearly, I would like to come to the conclusions, and these are the things that we have already talked about, that we certainly have to look at latencies, dynamic bandwidth allocations, and all that. Flat rate services, you buy 3 gigahertz at 500 rand, and you deal with those gigabytes as to the kind of services you want, voice, video on demand, etc., and all kinds of things. So, as you well know, this is where the new generation network comes on board. Voice is going to decline, it's going to be a commodity. Unless you provide services that are, some of them we still don't know what the kind of services will be. You better think of your ARPU in that particular respect, not increasing the cost of voice. Clearly, under the circumstances, having had our discussion this morning, connectivity, in other words, we must have that common pipe, which is a new generation network pipe. We must have the common access pipe, new generation access pipe. What should it be doing? It should provide content, all kind of information, etc. Because essentially, it's not the technology that the consumer is interested in. It is the content that the consumer gets out of that. Of course, the commercial interaction that can ever be thought of via this will be there. The e-services, etc., and all that. And with that in mind, I have just to say that the application involving multimedia, we are just scratching at the surface right now. There is still a lot coming. And therefore, as a regulator, I must be a catalyst for technological push and market pull. I should catalyze that for this to happen. Then everybody goes home happy and satisfied. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thanks so much, Paris, for reminding us where we've come in this technology and what the challenges are for us in the road ahead. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A. We need to wrap up and get out of this room by 1 o'clock, I suppose. Will you please thank Paris for a very good closing keynote one more time? Thanks, Paris.